All right. Well, if you are a person in the United States that might reference things like freedom or equality and pretend that that is what's happening in this country, you would be sorely mistaken. And for a lot of us that are more politically engaged, this is nothing new. But I just wanted to break down the story concerning prison labor, current slavery within the United States, and sort of the reality for people that are not overly familiar with what is happening, both with the loopholes of the 13th Amendment and just brazen abuse of migrant workers in the United States. So to start off here, we've got an article from AP that just came out this week. It says takeaways from the Associated Press's reporting on prison labor in Alabama. Starts off that no state has a longer, more profit-driven history of contracting prisoners out to private companies than Alabama, with a sprawling labor system that dates back more than 150 years, including the brutal convict leasing era that replaced slavery. It has constructed a template for the commercialization of mass incarceration. Best Western, Bama Budweiser, and Burger King are among the more than 500 businesses to lease incarcerated workers from one of the most violent, overcrowded, and unruly prison systems in the U.S. in the past 5 years alone. The Associated Press found as part of a 2-year investigation into prison labor. The cheap, reliable labor force has generated more than $250 million for the state since 2000, money garnished from prisoners' paychecks. So one thing I wanted to go over here quickly is the sort of jobs that they're working and where the incentive is and where the structure is to where these workers are forced to do free labor or forced to work for pennies on the dollar compared to any other worker in the United States, and how this is essentially modern day legal slavery. So it says, where are the jobs and what do they pay? Most jobs are inside facilities where the state's inmates who are disproportionately black can be sentenced to hard work and forced to work for free, doing everything from mopping floors to laundry. But in the past 5 years alone, more than 10,000 inmates have logged a combined 17 million work hours outside Alabama's prison walls for entities like city and county governments and businesses that range from major car parts manufacturers and meat processing plants to distribution centers for major retailers like Walmart, the AP determined. While those working at private companies can at least earn a little money, they face possible punishment if they refuse, from being denied family visits to being sent to high security prisons, which are so dangerous that the federal government filed a lawsuit 4 years ago that remains pending, calling the treatment of prisoners unconstitutional. Turning down work can jeopardize chances for early release in a state that last year granted parole to only 8% of its eligible prisoners, an all-time low and among the worst rates nationwide, though that number more than doubled this year after public outcry. So again, you can look at this like they stated, like they mentioned before, places anywhere from places like Walmart to McDonald's and Burger King to Budweiser to hotel chains to the current county and state governments with government work. All these are being leased out, and these jobs are being taken very coercively, if not explicitly mandatorily, from people in prison. And a lot of these people receive next to no money. And again, if they refuse, there are serious consequences, everything from being denied family visits to being denied early release. So even if you're a prisoner that is doing their time, being productive within the prison, having a good track record, you're not allowed to be released unless you do the work that they require you to do outside of the prison, where other people would make at least minimum wage. You're making nothing, if not next to nothing. And so, of course, this article goes on. I will share it in the details below on YouTube. But this is not isolated to Alabama. Alabama is the most brazen with this. Again, there's a lawsuit from the government over their, allegations that this is like, unconstitutional and things of that nature, but that is still up in arms. And who knows with how these sort of cases go, if it'll ever actually be a for sure exoneration of a completely bastardized system like this. But to go on from that, there's not only cases like this that have been popping up from prisons, which, is a bastardization of the 13th Amendment, the loopholes that were put in there to essentially allow modern day slavery through the prison system that has been exploited by major companies all over, from California to Alabama to Georgia, all these different places. But we are still living in an era of real modern day slavery, especially in the South. So this article from the Atlanta, Georgia Journal Constitution says this has been happening for a long time. This article is from a couple of years back, talking about human trafficking operations that shifted in immigration enforcement This article that I'm looking at here, again, comes from December of 2021, so 3 years ago from when I'm recording this. There is a years-long human trafficking operation trapped migrant workers in modern-day slavery on South Georgia farms, according to a federal indictment unsealed last week. Victims include over 100 laborers smuggled from Mexico and Central America into brutal and inhumane working conditions. Under the threat of gun violence, some were allegedly forced to dig for onions with their bare hands, earning only 20 cents for each bucket harvested. At least 2 people died on the job, and another allegedly repeatedly raped. When out in the fields, workers were detained in work camps surrounded by electrical fencing or held in cramped living quarters, including dirty trailers with raw sewage leaks. There were little to no access to food or safe drinking water. 24 accused members and associates of the criminal enterprise that perpetuated the exploitation now face a slew of felony charges, according to a press release from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Georgia. The multi-agency cooperation that yielded the indictment, dubbed Operation Blooming Onion, may be one of the largest ever human trafficking and visa fraud investigations in the country, Vice News reported. Only 2 of the defendants were described as South Georgia business owners in the indictment. Most were labor contractors or recruiters. Their alleged criminal mistreatment of workers took many forms. Again, this goes on to show, they kind of outlined it generally there, but just how rampant this was for years. The sort of network of farms and business owners, as well as, contractors and recruiters and things like that would bring in migrants, many of whom were, by the way, here legally because they are migrants seeking asylum, but they would be funneled. Whether or not they're here legally or illegally is irrelevant. They were funneled to these places when they were told and offered the promise of a better life, and instead they were subjected to brutal conditions, including murder, assault, strangling of resources on them to a day-to-day basis, unlivable housing conditions, and sexual violence. And again, this article I'll put in the links below as well, but it goes on to talk about that this indictment occurred in the South Georgia counties of Atkinson, Bacon, Coffee, Tatnall, Toombs, and Ware, where local farmers paid the defendants to provide contract labor. So again, this was branching out to a bunch of different local farms in the area and was just like a complete web of modern day slavery in the 2020s. And again, this is not the only case like this. If you look it up, they have popped up all over the place. And again, if you go into the prison labor aspect of this, which I know people might not find, if you're harsh on prison reform and things of that nature, you might not find as heart-wrenching, which is gross. You should think of those people as human. But this is literally people trying to come into this country for a better life, and they're subjected to absolute horrors and robbed of money and robbed of their labor. And this continues on. There's a few different videos that really break these things down well. I'll play a little snippet of this 6-minute long video from the Grio Politics here.
A group of 24 business owners, labor contractors, and recruiters in South Georgia have been named in a federal indictment alleging that they participated in a years-long human trafficking ring that investigators equated to modern-day slavery. The defendants are accused of forcing Mexican and Central American migrant workers to dig for crops barehanded at gunpoint. They allegedly paid the laborers 20 cents per bucket of crops. According to the indictment, the laborers were forced to live in inhumane work camps surrounded by electrical fences and given little to no food. At least 2 of the workers died under the brutal working conditions. The documents also allege their migrants were repeatedly raped. As if that's not enough, the conspirators often sold and traded the 100+ workers amongst themselves.
And that one just kind of breaks down what I was talking about earlier as far as Georgia human trafficking ring and modern day slavery that happened just a few years ago. That was a big story that I feel like didn't get as much national attention as maybe it should have. And then this other one breaks down from More Perfect Union, how Alabama is generating billions by trapping people in prison. So this goes on with a great interview here that I'll show a little snippet of a former incarcerated person that worked in fast food while they were incarcerated.
Well, a lot of people are calling it modern slavery. Does that feel right?
I was just about to say, that's slavery. That's slavery. You took away the whips, but you put the paperwork. Took away the masters and you put them in uniform. Same difference, same difference.
It kind of appears that there is a coordinated system in order to protect the labor that's created by the prison system.
Walk into a McDonald's in Alabama, and the worker flipping your McDouble could be an incarcerated person.
It's a sad situation, a way they getting rich off us.
The Alabama Department of Corrections farms out incarcerated people to work at hundreds of private companies and government agencies across the state.
McDonald's, Burger King, Golden Corral, Wendy's. They got a Wendy's contract right now. State Trooper's office.
They'll send everybody everywhere.
They'll send you everywhere. Yes, the parole office.
And even though ADOC trusts these incarcerated people to leave prison every day and work alongside the general public, many of them are still denied the chance at real freedom.
I work for y'all, but when I come up from parole, you deny me. Why would you deny me? Because I got free, because you're getting free service.
And kind of the incentive structure that Alabama has to keep these people in prison rather than letting them out, so that way they have a cheap workforce to exploit. All right, and then lastly, the short clip here. I don't know if I'll even play this. I'll just put this in the links below. There is a great video that breaks down the Alabama prisoners. There's 5 of them that are doing a lawsuit to push for the state against the state's power to punish prisoners who resist forced labor. So this is from the Real News Network. Maybe I'll play a segment of it here real quick, but again, check out all these videos below if you want to have a complete breakdown as well as the articles that were listed.
Involuntary servitude, they say that anyone duly convicted of a crime can be slave and labor can be used for slavery purposes. Now, the question becomes, what happens when a state take that clause and say it's no longer should be used? And the state that's being talked about was one of the crown jewels in slavery, the state of Alabama. Recently, in the state of Alabama, prisoners filed a suit challenging the utilization of forced labor and to the abolishment of slavery as we know it. The court ruled that the defendants in the case had qualified immunity and the prisoners had no standing in bringing this suit forward.
And finally, one thing that I wanted to just go over here quickly is the reality overall in the United States, according to this website, which is an organization fighting against modern day slavery in the United States called Walk Free. It's a global slavery index. This says modern day slavery in the United States. The estimated number of people living in modern slavery is over 1 million people. So 1,091,000 or 3.3 people per 1,000 people in the United States. The 2023 Global Slavery Index estimates that on any given day in 2021, there were 1.1 million people living in modern day slavery in the U.S., a prevalence of 3.3 people in modern slavery every 1,000 people in the country. This places U.S. among countries with the lowest prevalence of modern slavery in the region, 21 out of 25, and globally 122 out of 160, but represents the highest estimated total number of people in modern day slavery in the Americas, accounting for over 1/5 of people in modern slavery across the region. So that's something that people will point out. This is where people like to dive into percentages a lot and per capita to be like, well, the United States isn't doing as bad with the prevalence. Like I said before, 3.3 per 1,000 people, which is still incredibly high. But the fact that we have the larger population in North America shows that we have by far the most people in slavery to date. And everything from forced labor to in the prison system because of the loopholes in the 13th Amendment, to the absolute like illegal taking over of migrants' lives and making them live in hell for years on end and exploited and suffering through rampant violence. All of these things just go to show that, I don't know, like I often see a lot of people that supposedly care about human trafficking and about, about the problems, the abuses of humanity in this country, often dive into these very shiny objects, things of the day, whether it's, Epstein or Diddy or all these different people, sort of like the rich secret cabal of people that are trafficking your children or trafficking whatever. Where like the reality is like trafficking is a horrific problem in this country, but the realities are on a much more systemic level. And also in that instance, it's usually people within your community or loved ones or people that you know or your child knows in those child trafficking instances, as opposed to some rampant cabal of billionaires, But I digress from that. The important thing is, if you really care about trafficking, if you really care about equality, if you really care about workers' rights, you should be caring about this. We're in supposedly the most powerful country in the world where people talk about equality and justice and freedom and all these different things. Meanwhile, some of the most consumed products and most consumed services, whether it's fast food or fast fashion or, groceries or produce or whatever the case may be, there is blood and there is slavery attached to that in virtually vast majority of at least the companies that people buy from in this country. So it's just something to think about. Again, all these articles will be put below, but it's a stark reminder for people of what human trafficking, what slavery, what forced labor actually looks like in this country, and just how absolutely prevalent and disgusting it is.